Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we'll take a deep dive into negative electricity prices, the occasions when consumers are paid to use power. As I mentioned last week, recently we've seen a spate of such prices due to high wind and or solar output and low demand. But are they a symbol of market malfunction, or are they providing the correct incentives for storage facilities and for renewables producers to reduce output? Negative prices have been fairly common in Germany and Denmark, but are fairly new in the Nordic and Iberian regions. Can we expect more instances of below zero electricity prices in the months and years to come? I'm Richard Sverrisson, and joining me today are Jean-Paul Harreman of EnAppSys, Sigbjørn Seland of StormGeo, and Barillas of Aurora Research. A warm welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Let's start by asking whether negative prices are a symptom of market failure or an important part of the price-setting mechanism. Can I start with you, Jean-Paul?
Yeah, I think they are a fact of life, so to speak. So the fact that there are negative prices provides an incentive to invest in flexibility, and I think that is a correct working of the market.
Absolutely. Sigbjørn, what's your view?
Yes, I wouldn't use the word malfunctioning market, but obviously it's a symbol of an over supply, which might not have been there if you didn't have all these subsidies for new investments. So. But I wouldn't call it a malfunction.
Okay, but it's more a reaction of the oversupply of subsidized renewables. That's the
Absolutely.
main. Yeah. Okay. And Anna, what do you think?
Agree. I think negative prices are a result of a market mechanism that's meant to incentivize kind of consumption at the right times, and it just tells you that there's an excess of supply at that stage, and you need more consumption.
Absolutely. I mean, you three are all experts in your relevant markets and fields. And if I can start with the Netherlands or maybe Northwest Europe, Jean-Paul. So we've seen a prevalence of such prices over the past weeks, months even. What are the main reasons? Because it didn't seem to be so common before. What's changed now?
I think we've reached a tipping point. So we've seen very high power prices over the last year and a half or so. And that has prompted a lot of people who were facing super high electricity bills to invest in solar panels. A lot of solar panels behind the meter. And yeah, that's been hidden during the winter season, of course, because the sun obviously doesn't shine as much. And we had a pretty poor spring in terms of sunshine as well. So after spring finished and we started getting better weather like 3 weeks ago, suddenly the full extent of this new development of solar is feeding into the market. And basically what happens is that the interconnectors fill up with all the excess solar. And that means that the market decouples for intraday trading. So you see markets that have these huge excesses isolating themselves from markets with higher prices, just because the flows are so huge.
And you've seen it's also a result of the massive expansion of solar power within the Netherlands over the past few years. I mean, it's almost the country with the most growth in Europe.
Actually, it is the country with the highest solar capacity per capita. So, yeah, as an Icelander, you're probably used to saying we're the biggest per capita, but actually, in this case, it's the Netherlands.
Absolutely. So it's actually, and it's maybe not the country with the largest instances of sunny days, maybe, but
no. But if you put enough,
I think
if you put enough capacity in, it's going to produce power anyway. So
I mean, if we move to the Nordic region, Sigbjørn, I think in Denmark they've been quite common due to connectivity with Germany, the high amounts of wind and low demand. But we've seen more in the Nordic region. So with a high share of hydropower and also the wind. So what's changed in the Nordic region?
I guess what has changed is the same for the Nordic region as for the rest of Europe. It is the strong, very, very strong growth in solar and wind power all over Europe. But obviously also now with the high prices of the GOs, guarantees of origin, for sure that is, they have never been this high before, and for sure it allows hydropower producers or all kind of production which sort of qualifies for GOs to sell their power at prices below zero and still make a profit. So even if GOs have been around for quite a few years, they have never been traded at this high level before. So I would say the combination of high GO prices and all this new wind and solar now also sort of sets the stage for negative prices in the Nordic region. In all Nordic region, even the best regulated hydropower systems like NO2, we now see. So negative prices are now everywhere.
I think then, it's the interesting point there with the geo prices in specifically in Norway, Sigbjørn. But they're around 6, 7, or between, let's say between 5 and 7 euros. Can you imagine a situation where negative prices go lower than -7 then?
Well, that's a good question, because we have seen that once already. Even in like NO2, the very well-regulated hydropower system, we saw prices down at -10 on 10 or 12 or something, so quite much below the GO price. And I must say I'm a bit short of explanation for that fact. I wouldn't, I don't quite understand why we saw so low price. It's you can say it's fairly easy to understand that you see prices down. I say -7 equals the GO price, but even lower is a bit difficult to understand, I would say.
Maybe it's a topic for another podcast, Sigbjørn, maybe, or something we can explore. Maybe something I can ask some of the journalists at Montel to explore this for a news story. But it's a bit of a conundrum, certainly. But wind and solar capacity maybe is not increasing so rapidly in Norway, but in Sweden and in Finland. Would you expect this to lead to more negative prices?
I think with the current the track we're on, I would say. Obviously will lead to more negative prices everywhere. We are on a track towards, I would say, massively oversupplied electricity system in the Nordic region and elsewhere in Europe as well. You add 60 to 80 gigawatt of new intermittent capacity every year into a system with basically no demand growth. So every day we are one step closer to more negative prices. So I would say that is the situation for the next couple of years. We most definitely will see more negative prices everywhere.
That's interesting. I think we'll come back to maybe the consequences of that. Certainly what Jean-Paul was talking about, the incentives for flexibility and for storage. But Anna, if I can turn to you now. What Spain is slightly different because you don't have the as far as I'm aware, you haven't seen negative prices in the day ahead time frame, but certainly intraday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What are the main drivers there?
The main drivers of negative pricing is the same, right? So, you have a combination of inflexible kind of assets in the form of kind of nuclear, coal, gas, etc., which are much better off kind of running at a loss than having to kind of turn down the plant and then incurring the expense of kind of restarting the plant and the loss of efficiency that implies. So negative prices happen when you have a inflexible generation or renewables that are incentivized to generate even at negative prices. The reason we haven't seen as much in Spain is because I think, relatively speaking, there's less inflexible kind of generation. and renewables are not incentivized to run when prices are negative. It's just not the way the market works. You don't get a feed-in tariff of 30, which means that you're happy generating at minus 29 because you still get the 1. And so we have seen less of that. And what that means is that, of course, some of the drivers, the inflexibility particularly, still causes negative pricing, but it does some more in the intraday market because it's when you have less time to adjust your generation plans. And so that's kind of the key reason for kind of having not so much in the day ahead market, but seeing some in the intraday.
So the sort of underlying drivers are the same, but there are there's sort of key differences here, I think, aren't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And have there been calls in Spain, for example, to curb outputs from these kind of from renewables producers, or is it that just happens automatically?
Yeah, no, I mean, if prices are if prices are zero, what happens is renewables don't have necessarily the incentive to produce, right? So the problem is when they have the incentive to produce at negative prices. Of course, you don't have the incentive to produce anyway, and so the revenues are still very low. So yes, that there is obviously kind of some shedding or kind of economic curtailment of renewables. It's just that the threshold is at a different level. It's at zero instead of negative prices.
Interesting. And Jean-Paul, what's the reaction been in the Netherlands to these instances?
Well, we've been expecting this for a while, although it's been limited to weekends for the large part. So yeah, of course, renewable developers are getting worried because subsidy schemes require at least 18 hours of positive prices per day. So that is a worry. We've seen a lot of interest in developing flexible solutions like batteries, compressed air. Of course, we don't have mountains, so we can't do pump storage. But yeah, on that side, the tariff structure of the grid is impeding a super fast development of that. So I think everybody's now preparing for a couple of years where we're going to face these heavy negative periods during not only weekends but also weekdays in the summer. And of course, that's going to flow into the neighboring countries like NO2, for example, is one of the reasons NO2 goes below the GO tariff is it's just excess flowing in at super negative prices from Germany and Netherlands.
So, well, I mean, you said weekdays in summer. What are we talking? Are we talking, a Monday? Are we talking a Friday, which is generally lower demand? I mean, and for 2 or 3 more years, you're saying?
Well, I mean, this depending on the speed of development of flexibility, this can last multiple years. I think in terms of renewable development, we're even though Netherlands has about 20 gigawatts of solar installed, we're still at the start. So all of the regional energy strategies focus on putting more rooftop solar on, in place, and this is not going to slow down. So this is the new reality people will have to start to deal with.
But isn't this kind of quite welcome in the aftermath of the energy crisis that suddenly, especially maybe for householders and for industrial companies, that instead of paying huge amounts for their power, they're now getting it for free or being paid to use it?
Well, actually, it's a negative incentive. So personally, I've put solar panels on my roof, but on a Sunday morning, I wouldn't. If I'd be on a flexible tariff, I would have to pay for my production now. On the other hand, in the Netherlands, there's still legacy regulation in place where I can actually offset my summer solar generation versus my winter consumption. So that is obviously pushing the development of solar further ahead and impacting the market with non-dispatchable generation.
So are you seeing, is that impacting the rollout of expansion so far from, trying to getting close to reaching the targets that have been set? Actually, it's slowing down because of these negative incentives or these perverse incentives?
No. So what I'm saying is that these negative incentives, there's only a few people in the Netherlands that have these flexible contracts.
Okay, and you're one of the lucky ones.
And I'm one of the lucky ones that doesn't. So I can still offset my my summer generation versus my winter consumption. And of course, it'd be silly not to do that as long as the regulations are in place.
I mean, if I can turn to you then, and Sigbjørn, and ask you about the consequences of these negative prices. I mean, what does it mean for, we've talked a little about flexibility in batteries. Surely these instances would be the perfect opportunity to develop more of these kind of facilities, these units that can, for storage or, flexible.
Obviously, this the current trend leads to better and better profitability for batteries, flexible green hydrogen, any form of flexible demand as we speak. But volumes are still very, very small, I would say. Even if you see now that the development is moving faster, you see more battery investments and the like, but we are still years ahead where we see sort of balanced development on the supply versus demand side. So you just add much more new intermittent capacity for still a long time, and I would say flexible demand. Obviously, the business case improves by the day, but it's still a big imbalance here that will last. But I would like to mention also, regarding what Jean-Paul said, because what I think is a bit interesting, if I use myself as an example, here in Norway we all have smart meters at our homes, and most of us have spot price agreements with our suppliers. And for me, for instance, with an electric car, it provides strong incentives to be sort of flexible consumer. I plan my charging of the car several days up to 1 week ahead, based on the spot price forecasts we make. So I would say in this system, that is obviously a desirable situation, that we should all be consumers behaving, acting on the price signal. And that development, I think, need to sort of speed up, because that adds a lot of flexibility into this market
at the household level. So it's not just smart meters, but smart consumers, like yourself, Sigbjørn. Yeah. If enough consumers behave like me, that's probably not to expect, since I'm more interested in this field than most others. But that is the structure should be developed towards or to incentivize that kind of behavior. And I mean, I think negative prices could be beneficial for some consumers, and also for people such as Jean-Paul, who are lucky to be on these kind of tariffs. But if isn't it also a signal that the market is sort of out of balance, out of sync? So what can be done to restore that balance?
Yeah, and I think, again, it comes down to the reasons for the negative prices, right? Like, I think, it's the nature of a market that includes inflexible generation, that the economic decision is to pay during some hours rather than incur the cost later. That's just a rational economic decision. And there's probably less that we can do about that sort of stuff until we have more flexibility in the system. I do think there are other consequences, or there are other things that need to be looked at, right? So the sign of CFDs is an interesting one. Like, what if you have a CFD contract that is not limited or only limited for a few hours, in terms of what happens when you have negative prices, the reality is that the consumer eventually is paying for a bigger kind of share of the difference, right? So if you have a CFD at 30 and then prices are minus 20, then the consumer has to pay the difference, right? The 50. And obviously that's a negative consequence for the consumers. And so I think one of the things that we need to think about is the design of these mechanisms to ensure that in the cases that you have negative prices, that they're for the right reasons and not for policy reasons that haven't been well thought through. So I think there is an element of kind of making sure that, the reason for the negative prices is the right one and not just a bad policy decision.
So what would be the right one?
In terms of this, for example, for CFD designs, I mean, I think it's as simple as if prices are negative, then you don't get paid, or your generation doesn't count the way that the Spanish system works, right? Like the incentive of generating at negative prices doesn't make any sense if the cost is then being passed on to consumers, for example. Of course, if you can't avoid negative prices, because there are reasons, as I said, that they're the economic outcome, then I think incentivizing flexibility, and we talked about it, storage, kind of flexible demand, kind of tariffs that incentivize people using electricity when it's cheapest. Obviously, they make perfect sense, and we should do that anyway.
But designing those contracts for difference or CFDs, that should be done at national level, or is that EU level? Is that something that you'd like to see done in Brussels?
I mean, I think the direction has been set at kind of European kind of level in terms of limiting the number of hours that you can get, in terms of negative prices, the 6-hour rule. But I think other member states have gone and done their own thing as well to try to mitigate this, right? So I know that France, for example, has made it clear that, you don't get paid if prices are negative under the CFD contracts. As I mentioned, Spain, your energy doesn't count towards a CFD contract if prices are below zero. And all of this means that there's less incentives for renewables to generate at negative prices.
Jean-Paul, if I can, ask you about, with the, have you seen kind of a rollout of, if you put it this way, if you have the rollout of electric vehicles and green hydrogen, will that curb the instance of negative prices? You mentioned kind of a time frame, the next couple of years, we're likely to see more of them, but what would happen in 2 years, 3 times, so that we don't see so many of instances of such prices?
Yeah, it takes time to build out the infrastructure. And I think large-scale hydrogen facilities are very scarce at the moment. We are seeing plans, and I think in policy decisions, we're seeing them back as well. So if there's a new offshore wind farm being granted, the embedding of the power into the larger system, like combining it with a hydrogen facility, definitely counts as a pro for that bid. So we're seeing things happening, but yeah, in all honesty, it's going to take a while until we get green hydrogen to a level that it actually can impact power prices to such an extent that we can avoid negative prices.
So, yeah, okay, you're talking a 5-10 year time frame, maybe even more ambitious than that for green hydrogen. But what are the other investments that will kind of make, lead to a bit more of a balance?
I think probably the biggest investment would be in policy. Just make policy that disincentivizes producing at negative prices, like Spain and France have definitely done. That should help. I think speaking for the whole of Europe, I think politicians realize that something has to be done. On the other hand, you have local differences, and if we look at the Netherlands, so the party that won the last elections is completely against any change in the over the year netting of solar generation. So you have what's good. What's the right thing to do for the market, and you have what's the right thing to do to win elections. But policy is the quickest way to getting rid of negative prices.
So basically, by saying if prices go negative, you don't get paid. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that seems to be a fairly, one size fits all kind of response in a way, Jean-Paul. But if we turn to the Nordic region, Sigbjørn, are some bidding zones likely to see more frequent instances of negative prices than others, and which ones in particular are more susceptible to them?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think all price zones will see an increased number of those negative prices, some being more resistant than others. And NO2, it should be the most resistant area due to the dominant position of the big water reservoirs. Makes it very flexible. And also, in Finland and Sweden, you add more new capacity, other things equal, inducing more negative prices in those zones. So, like NO2 being the most resistant one, and the rest of the systems zones less resistant to negative prices. But basically, the trend is towards more negative prices. That's sort of the bottom line.
And Sigbjørn, for those listeners who maybe be unaware of the intricacies of the Nordic bidding zones, NO2, you mean the southern Nord?
Yeah, southwestern Norway part of
absolutely. And what's your view, Anna, here in Spain? I mean, are you likely to see what's happening in the Netherlands being repeated in Spain? I mean, perhaps not, because the policy measures are in place to prevent that.
Well, I mean, I think there's such a big increase in solar that is coming up in the next few years without the corresponding increase in flexibility and storage that I do think instances of negative prices, even in the day-ahead market, might be observed a bit more frequently. I don't think it will be kind of very material, but I think it will happen. And the reason for that is, I was saying you don't have as much inflexible kind of generation in Spain, but you do some, right? You have nuclear assets that, can't ramp down and up as quickly as they do in France, for example, and just generally are more inflexible than some other assets. In Spain, at least. And so I do think you're going to see some more instances of negative pricing, precisely because you have that kind of base of generation that's just harder to manage, and a lot of solar coming online, which is the key point.
Absolutely. And if I could just round off with you, Jean-Paul, and say, what does this do to the investment climate or the incentives to roll out more solar and wind? If I'm a developer and I see wow, this area's got loads of negative prices, I'm going to be a bit reluctant to build out there.
And rightfully so, I would say. Now, of course, what these negative prices are now a feature for part of the year. For if they're solar related, if they're wind related, you'll see them in a bit wider part of the year. But I think the key message to renewable developers is keep in mind that you'll have to be able to shift your load to fit with the interesting prices that you may see. If you're not able to shift your load to higher price periods, then you're going to see declining capture prices for both solar and wind in the future, until finally demand catches up and we start producing massive amounts of green hydrogen and other power to X technologies.
Absolutely. So, and Sigbjørn, a final word from you. What would be your message to policymakers?
Well, the least policies, the better, one could also say, because if you fix something, you normally destroy something else in a way. I think that's what we are seeing right now. So that's I wouldn't dare giving one sort of general policy advice, but you see when you go through like big changes as we see right now, making good policies is very, very difficult. That's for sure. So, but obviously, if something is clearly giving the wrong incentives, one probably should try to make changes.
Make changes without, there's always the issue of these unintended consequences. But maybe a topic for another podcast. But Sigbjørn, Anna, and Jean-Paul, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast.
You're welcome.
Thank you.